Hi, I am Nick D. Clements, and I used to make stuff like this. This is our Scan and Cut. It's a craft cutter made by Brother. I got it a few years ago. It's one of the first models they made and it works fairly well. I've used it on and off on various projects. My first introduction to craft cutters like this was with the original Cricut. My brother got one when he was starting out as a teacher, and that thing actually infuriated me. Not because of the way it functioned, but just the philosophy around the entire product. Because the only way you could use it was by purchasing these ridiculously overpriced cartridges that you would plug into it, and then it would have a predefined set of shapes. Like you'd buy this giant cartridge and it would have like 3 different alphabets on it, or a different cartridge with like circles and squares. And after like 5 or 6 cartridges, you could buy 2 more machines for what you just paid. And the worst part, the cartridges were the only way to cut things. There was no user interface. You have this machine, this plotter, that can cut any shape imaginable, and you're limited to shapes that someone else came up with and said, here, you can cut this, because we don't think you're intelligent enough to use a piece of software and cut your own shapes. And plus, if you can cut your own shapes, we can't charge you for our cartridge. Having a machine that I know is capable of making anything I want, but being limited to someone else's designs, that was just so upsetting. But eventually, everyone caught on to that, even Cricut. I'm pretty sure the new Cricuts have user interfaces where you can obviously cut anything you want. But I first came across the Scan and Cut, which not only allows you to cut any shape you want using their software, it also has a built-in scanner, so you can just scan something through and then the software detects the shapes and it'll cut it out for you. Which I thought was a really cool feature at first, and used it for a bit and tried to exploit it to get it to do what I wanted it to do, and slowly kind of realized that really all you need is the software, and the scanning feature is really kind of more gimmicky or for just someone who doesn't really want to mess around with the software too much. And the scanning feature does provide a more simple and direct route to cut out shapes. But all of that stuff aside, the reason I'm sharing it with you today is because I only very, very recently realized that this thing can cut vinyl. For whatever reason, I thought that vinyl cutters were something different. But no, I mean, this thing can cut thick chipboard and plastic cutting boards and fabric and anything else. There's no reason it can't cut a thin piece of vinyl. So today, I want to use this to cut a big vinyl NDC logo to stick on the back of my car. I think that'll be really cool, so let's give it a shot. To begin, I want to try and dial in my settings and make sure I have a good cut depth for cutting the vinyl. As you can see, my cutting mat has a bit of a bend in it. I ordered this one online and obviously it wasn't packaged very well, but so far that hasn't caused any major issues. I set the cut pressure to 2, and then I removed the blade cartridge and set the actual depth of the blade to 2 as well. With just a small random shape selected, I tell it to go ahead and make the cut. Alright, those settings seem to be perfect. It cut all the way through the vinyl material, but didn't cut all the way through the backing or into the mat, which is excellent. To start things off, I first need to convert my logo into an SVG file. This is the file format you need to use if you want to be able to import vectors into the Canvas Workspace software. So just quickly rebuilding that logo in Illustrator and then saving it as an SVG. I could then go to the Scan and Cut website and load up the Canvas Workspace webpage. However, to my surprise, it appears they are now offering a desktop version of the software that you can download for Windows, which is awesome. Here you can see the web version, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. It's well designed, it's a very clean layout and simple to understand, but I definitely want to try the desktop version, so I'm going to download that and get it installed. So now on the desktop version, all I really need to do is import my SVG of the logo. And then I want to make it pretty much as large as I possibly can, so I expand it to fill pretty much the entire canvas workspace. The piece of vinyl I'm going to be cutting this out of is already missing a small piece at the bottom, so I can't make it fill the entire 12 by 12 area, but I think this will be plenty big enough. Once I'm happy with that, I just need to export the file as an FCM file, which I can then put on a USB drive, plug into the Scan and Cut, and read it from there. Accessing USB storage and selecting my logo, I can see a preview and everything looks pretty good, except for some reason there's a line missing on the end. I'm not really sure what would have caused that, and at this point I can either go back to the software and try and change a few things around to see if I can get it to include that final line on the end, or I can just cut it and see if maybe it's just something with the display, like sometimes how a PDF doesn't show everything until you zoom in or out. So I go ahead and just figure I'll cut it. The cut process went really well. That bend in the mat almost caused me a few issues, but overall everything was fine. However, the line on the end was indeed missing from the cut instructions. So now I can go back to the software and tell it to cut only that line, and since I haven't removed the mat yet, the registration will still be the same, so that'll work just fine. But since it's just one straight line, I think I'll just remove it and cut it by hand. It's pretty hard to see where I need to start and stop the cuts because the lines are so faint, but since this is vinyl, I figure I'll just mark on it with some dry erase. With those 2 points marked out, I can now carefully make my cut. And that seemed to work just fine. Erasing the dry erase marker, no issues there. Now this next step, if I was making this as something I would be selling, I would probably forego, but since this is for me, I want to try and salvage as much of this vinyl material as I can. It's not extremely expensive, but sometimes you need to cut really small things out of vinyl, so it'd be useful to have these scraps. So I'm basically cutting away as much good usable material as I can. With all that material cut away, I'm now moving on to the transfer sheet. And again, there's probably a lot of different solutions for this transfer sheet, but I just got the stuff labeled as vinyl transfer sheeting. So I cut a piece of that out the size of my logo. So now it's time to peel away all the excess material and see how good the cut actually came out. Everything peeled off pretty well. I just had a tiny bit of material still connecting where I made the manual cut, but once that's removed, I can now apply the transfer sheet on top of it. Basically, the adhesive of the transfer sheet is weaker than the adhesive of the vinyl. So you stick the vinyl to the transfer sheet, and then when you apply it to something like a car window, the vinyl will stick to the window and won't be peeled off when you remove the transfer sheet. This is how you can have all kinds of vinyl lettering floating in midair, getting them spaced exactly where they need to be. Now again, if you were making this as a product to sell, you would then reapply the backing of the transfer sheet. But since this is for me, I'm just going to head right outside and put it on my car. First things first, I have to get all the dirt off my back window, specifically in the area where I'm going to be applying the vinyl sticker. And with that clean, I can attempt to place the logo nice and center in the middle of the window. smoothing it out now, trying to get as few bubbles as possible. Peeling off the transfer sheet. As you can see, the vinyl is nice and stuck onto the window. And that looks pretty good. Alright, well, I am really pleased with how this came out. I only had a few issues during the application, a couple of bubbles, kind of had a big one in the end that I was trying to squeegee out with my thumb, but then realized it's plenty hot enough where I can just peel it right back off and let the air out and put it back on, so should have done that in the first place. But overall, it still came out really good. I think it looks really cool, so I'm excited to have it on there, and especially for my second ever attempt at doing vinyl work. I am very pleased. I don't think I'll have any issues with it coming off or peeling off. I don't use my back wiper that much, and even if it does scrape off, I can obviously always just make another one. But these have been on there for several years, and actually when we ordered these and I saw that they're pretty much homemade, I figured, well, if this person can make it, I certainly should be able to, and obviously I can. So I did, however, figured I was going to try and salvage the transfer sheet to use for future ones, but I have plenty more. I just figured I'd try and reuse it if I could, but next time. Also really excited that they released the Canvas Workspace software as a downloadable program, so you don't need to use the web interface to create the FCM files for doing the cutting. So that's really cool if you're like on location somewhere, you don't have a good internet connection, you can still do your projects without needing to be online. Not that the web interface didn't work, it worked fine. I just prefer being able to use an installed piece of software or an app instead of having to use something in the browser. But with that, my sincere thank you for watching. Once again, I am Nicky Clements. If you're wondering, Nick is short for Nicholas, and the D stands for Donovan. Anyway, I'm off to make something. Which is really cool. I dropped by and pressed my dice.